You're listening to a 4x4 Radio Network podcast.
We should really start the show.
Yeah, we should. Hey, Jeepers. Welcome to episode 166 of On the Trail with Kevin and Scott. I'm Kevin, the engineer, a little overwhelmed up on good fresh brewed iced tea. And Scott's over there working on it with a double bagger hit of iced tea to wake up.
And I am Scott. I am the half asleep parts guy who is probably going to take some time. So by the middle of the show, I will start with a nice, slow timbre voice and sound like an overly caffeinated woodchuck by the time we're done. So while we will always share what works for you, as well as what didn't, or works for us as well as what didn't.
That's what we were talking
like
about.
The opening of the show 6 years and 166 episodes later. Remember, it's up to you to do your research, read the instructions, and please
Follow them.
That's right, guys. So I think we should start off the episode with a very, very interesting thing. Kevin, what was it you said about the show when we started?
Well, we've always talked about, particularly early in the beginning, and it's held true, which is this is really the listener show. It's not really our show. I can talk to Scott and get the message across. I don't have to record it and put it out on iTunes and all the other places. So this is your show. And this show probably at the time of recording, this is our most user-driven show.
Yes.
Every single topic we are going to cover is courtesy of some of our listeners. I'm psyched, guys. Keep it up. I don't have to think of crap to talk about.
Well, it's not only that. It's also like, everyone, like someone put out a challenge, saying, how deep can Kevin go in a rabbit hole of technology?
Oh, did we go today?
Boy, we went on, we set out to go on exit 13 and ended up on exit 42 next to giant mouse ears.
Well, and don't spoil it. That's in the garage segment because that one was literally done.
Like 4 minutes ago. Yeah, in the garage 4 minutes ago.
We're still recovering from the 105 degrees in the garage.
Maybe that's why we were snorting the exhaust fumes.
But anyway.
I do want to start off with a quick email, and you might have seen the post on the Facebook page, and this is me, and I'll be 100% disclosing and honest with you guys. We all know I've been through a lot, and sometimes, my feelings are on my shoulder, and it was funny because it was the classic breakdown, and one of our listeners called it. I think George is the one that called it, and he goes, so basically, Swamp, one of our listeners, way back when the Earth's crust was cooling in 2019.
Yeah, pre-COVID days.
Yes, pre-COVID days, sent us an email, and that was
this neat idea.
With this neat idea about using a sewer jetter to clean up the frame rails, and even sent us a video on how to do it. And he said, what do you guys think? And I said, well, kind of cool. And I talked about how Kevin, tilted his nose down on the Jeep or whatever and how he did it and completely blew past the important part. So as Kevin and I are doing what we did last show and we're sitting there thinking we had a really cool idea.
We discovered a new process, which was using a sewer jetter that I was using to clean out the drain lines for the downspouts of the house that go out into the woods of my old house. And it was like, oh, look at that. This thing was more contorted, than a TJ frame. And
then we had a massively cool brainstorm. And then we talk about it on the show. And then we get the email from Swamp saying, guys. And I'm like, oh, darn. So this is me.
It was a whole lot more energetic than that.
Well, no, and I will always disclose with you guys. And again, this isn't a excuse, is an apology. Even back then,
it is an apology, but it's not an excuse.
Yeah. It's I screwed that up.
That's okay.
Whoops. But the big important thing is that, I always want to be upfront and transparent with the listeners.
Right.
And I immediately emailed back and said, I apologize, didn't know this, we'll give you credit, the whole 9 yards. And I did the post without waiting for the reply from Swamp.
Yep.
And Swamp's like, I was just laughing about it. It was kind of funny. And I'm like, here and now I feel even worse now. And then George is like, so you thought...
See, Swamp, this is one issue you had with him. I've been with him for 6 years now.
And it was funny because he kind of felt bad because he cycles his podcast like I do,
Yeah,
and it was
it's just when he came back to us, he's like, Oh, crap.
And of course, it's that show he listens to, you know. But it was fun. It was a really cool moment, in my opinion, because again, not to go too deep into it, but it's like, you know, dude, if we do so, please let us know.
Yeah.
And you guys did in so many ways. It's like, it's really, really cool how much feedback we've gotten. Hold on, I got to grab the list over here.
Yeah, I was wondering why you set the digital assistant of yours.
It makes all kinds of weird noises with the board, and like that right there. But I did want to say something real quickly about Nathan.
Okay.
We talked about the collision avoidance light on the back, you know, blinking.
Oh, yeah, the blinking versus the solid reds versus no third brake light at all.
And of how I'm driving down Die 4 sometimes, and I slip on the brakes and look in the rearview mirror and see the dude behind me going, oh, God. You know, he's holding 2-3 points of harness, basically.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do what I did. And he's like, hey, you know, it's a great idea, but by the way, I still got hit even with the blinking light. So I'm like, oh, no. But everyone's okay. No one got hurt. Not a whole lot of major damage. So I'm still going to do it. I still think it's a great idea. But Nathan, thank you for the feedback. Yep. We really appreciate that. That was really cool.
Well, and that's the classic, you know, real world experience of what worked and what didn't. And, you know, the truth is we don't know how many other cars did stop over the past time that Nathan had the blinking third brake light. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I'm sure it'll become mandatory because the safety nannies will make sure that it's all on there. It's kind of like Ford. Your door's open. Your window's open. Hey, your transmission's still in gear. Hey, your door's still open. Hey. Shut up.
It's like I have a klaxon going off, you know. You know, at least in the British cars, they have like on some cars, they have a nice gentleman. You know, that's how they let you know your seatbelt's not on. You know, or Achtung, you know, on the German cars, you know, attention. I went on a tyrant.
That's okay. So did I, but that's just...
Hey, the caffeine kicked in. And here's where Kevin really starts to think, what am I doing here? Now I have the power. So anyways, yes, the caffeine definitely, man, this is some good stuff. What is it, tidbits tea again? Earl Grey? What are we having again?
I introduced him to a British tea called PG Tips.
Ah.
And it's...
PG Tips, Latin for heart buzzing. That's not a background in the mic, guys. That's my heart going...
There went our British listeners. Sorry, folks. Cheers. I'll understand. But anyway, yes, Scott, you have kind of hit your system, didn't it?
It did. We
want to see it.
We were looking at videos and stuff like that. All of a sudden, I'm an auctioneer already. I'm an overly caffeinated squirrel right now on a hot tin roof. Hello, my baby. Hello, my darling. Okay, back to Jeeps.
Barely had a quarter of a glass.
Back to Jeeps. Back to Jeeps. So, what was I saying again?
Oh, God.
Get us back on the rails, Kevin. Come on, get us back on the rails.
You're moving on to our next listener comment that helped us with the show material.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, what
were you done with Nathan? Did you cover everything you wanted to talk about with Nathan?
Yes, I did. And Nathan, I'm glad to hear no one got seriously hurt.
Yes,
we're all joking aside.
Yeah.
But I did want to make a quick comment about the Gladiator.
Okay.
I had to do some fun stuff because, you know, it never happens when you're ready to do it. And I knew this was coming because at 60,000 miles, I've been driving all over, you know, everywhere with that thing. And I went to remote start it the other day. And it's like, you know, and of course, you know, we all know it's 10 billion degrees outside. And I walked out to the garage. I'm like, the Jeep's not running. Remote start again. And all of a sudden the Jeep goes, really? So I walk in and the Jeep God smiled. I pushed the start button and it started up and I'm like, okay, right to the auto parts store I go. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad this happened before we put the winch in because, you know, that would have been really bad had that happened. But it was just kind of interesting because, you know, the young man at the auto parts store who, you know, they offer free installation and I'm not the young pup I used to be. I said, sure, you can huff that battery over that fender. But we put it in, and I got an AGM battery, and he didn't know about the terminals being live. And
Gotcha.
he has done a couple of batteries on a couple of JLs. And as I'm talking to him, he's like, man, I didn't know any of this. I'm like, all right. So I took a page out of Kevin's book, and I took one of the rubber gloves I keep in the Jeep, and we put it over the positive terminal and set it off to the side and got it all knocked out. And I helped him out. I mean, I helped him do it, but it was just kind of fun that here we go. You know, I knew it was coming. So if you keep an eye with your JL and Gladiator owners, if you start getting the message on your dashboard that start-stop system unavailable battery charging, and it goes more than 2 days.
That
may
means-
want to have your battery tested.
Yeah, because it's trying to charge and it can't.
And my battery volts were like 14.2, 13.9.
Well, that's not battery. That's your charging voltage.
volts. Thank you.
And folks, let me reiterate for those of you that are kind of new to the show, there's a past episode, but I'm going to give you the short version of it. Any of your vehicles with a push to start system, I'm not push to start, with the start stop system, have a secondary battery that's buried. All right. It's typically in the Gladiators, it's under the main battery, right?
Yeah, same with the JLs.
JLs. And when you are servicing your vehicle and you have for some reason disconnected the battery terminal, all right, don't let it fall.
Yeah.
You have to cover it with something insulating, because if it touches something, you have a second battery, and it's usually not dead when the other one's disconnected, and can short out and can destroy. Oh, good Lord, you've got that.
Well, usually it takes out the bus bar.
Yeah, and there are other components that it can damage. It can also damage you if you're not careful.
Yeah,
it's like any battery. You know, when they short, they kind of tend to go zap and smoke and get hot, and so just remember that the easiest thing to do is to disconnect that positive terminal and cover it. I usually recommend any kind of an insulating sleeve, a piece of hose that will fit over the terminal, and anything like that, just to keep that positive from shorting against the chassis, a wrench, yourself, whatever.
Yeah, we doubled it up. We used the glove, and then I wrapped a shop rag around it. That's hard to say.
Yeah.
And so that way there's 2 layers of protection, one for obvious abrasion and the other for actual contact.
Right.
So.
And as a sidebar, for those of you who, man, I know a lot of the Jeepers also have usually some sort of a truck. And if it's a diesel truck, no matter what band, there's 2 batteries. So remember, when you're changing the batteries, number one, change both, because otherwise the new one will get drawn down by the old one. And 2, you always have power.
Yeah.
So when you take the battery out and change it, unlike the young man who helped me change the batteries in the parking lot, and I would say, don't let the zap terminal touch. He said, why? I have the ground off. I said, you only have the ground off this battery. There's another one on the other side.
That's a question. On those diesel batteries in your truck, are they wired in series or parallel?
They're wired in parallel.
Okay, so is
it's
that
12 volts.
Okay.
When both of them are there, if they're, let's say, they're 1,000 amp hour starting batteries, there's 2,000 amps available on those cables.
Dang.
So yeah, you can definitely melt some lead terminals and weld something and things like that. So just be safe. I mean, the days of, take the negative off first and, keep it away from the terminal, and then you're safe to do anything you want on the positive, they're over, folks.
Yeah.
Unless you know for sure you only have one battery. Take off the negative first. That's still a good idea. Take the positive off and isolate it. I can't say that enough. You've got to isolate it. We talked some different means and methods for isolating them. My favorite one is a piece of heater hose, or not heater hose. That's not big enough. Usually old radiator hose.
Old radiator hose, yeah.
Old radiator hose with a zip tie through one end that it can't poke out. It kind of holds it in there, and you pinch it together, and then you just slide it over and forget about it. And it helps to those inadvertent oopses.
Yeah, and they also say if you have a JL or Gladiator, be careful jumping it, because, again, that bus bar is very sensitive, and it's there for a reason. So just kind of keep that in mind, when you do those kind of things, because that was my biggest concern. A couple times when I was in the cold weather in North Carolina, when it was like 12 degrees, I would literally start the truck up, and I would not shut it off till I got home.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to jump start someone at the gas station,
Who doesn't know?
No. I just that was me just being retentive.
Gotcha. So, all right. So what's next on your little checklist there?
Well, the other thing we have is perusing the Facebook pages. A listener kind of reached out to us and told us about Riley's Rebuilds.
Yeah, that was awesome.
That's actually pretty cool. If you haven't checked out her page, she's a young lady that basically she's asking for, hey, does anybody have any, old carburetor parts, Edelbrock and whatever, because she rebuilds carburetors and she sells them, and that's how she drives a Jeep. She has, looks like a Jurassic Park YJ. And, she took up the mantle, wanted to do this, learning how to do it, does all the work herself. So check out her Facebook page. I put it on a link to our Facebook page.
Yeah. And if you're struggling with carburetors, she has got the touch. And that is becoming a very rare skill to take apart a carburetor, clean it, correct any problems in the jetting, make sure the passages are open, and then recalibrate it properly. So, and it's awesome to see a young person taking up this kind of a skill as well that pretty much only old farts like me are still playing with.
And someone like me maybe here soon.
Yeah. Cool.
Foreshadowing.
Of course. Yeah, well, this is true. We'll wait till the weekend.
Which is here in 2 days.
Yeah.
But no, again, we had a really good time over the past few days. Kevin, I can speak for myself. I'm getting more on my garage set up and stuff like that. Things are starting to calm down a little bit, which is really nice. The life is solidifying a little bit, and things are going well at the moment.
Creating a new sense of normal.
Yes, definitely creating a nuisance.
And let's see, over here, we are in our house in even further out of Nowheresville, Florida. We're more central than we were. Excuse me. And I did get some stuff stacked in the garage to the point that I can actually see all the boxes I have to unpack, as opposed to being just a monumental pile of cardboard. Truthfully, I now have access to most of my tools again, and I'm able to start some projects. I still have to go and do some electrical work to get myself power for the welder. I still can't weld anything, which is sad because in addition to my mower, my ZTR mower throwing its belt, I've got about a 6-inch wide crack in the mouth of the...
Oh, no.
Well, the mower, I've realized, is 12 years old.
Yeah. It's
had 4 replacement drives, the hydraulic drives. So, it's getting up there. But I've got to put in the power circuits for the saws and the tools and that kind of stuff. So, but at least I can walk around and find things and plan. We are proceeding a little bit on starting to get the new barn, which will become the new home of this podcast permanently. The sketch works and the concept works finished, and that will be nice. And we're going to hopefully add, and this is a promise we've said before, but it's a little ways out, a little more in the video content.
Yes.
Because the new barn will not be in an operable, home garage. It's going to be in a barn with a lift, and we're going to be able to set up and follow a project and not have to tear it all down so I can park my wife's car when she comes home from her job, although she's going to retire shortly too.
Yeah.
So we appreciate all the well wishes and everything like that. And we're getting there. We're getting there.
We are definitely getting there. Yeah. And one of the listeners' email was Brandon. He asked about shocks, wanted to find out, what our opinion on them was. And the interesting thing when it comes to shocks, I immediately said, do not buy Skyjack or hydraulic shocks. Because they are not friendly for the ride quality. But I'd love to be able to tell them how my Rock Sports ride. I'm sorry, William. I'm sorry, Madsen. But
we'll have to get together. Madsen and Will and anybody else. I may just have to, go over and find Autumn and say, Autumn, give me the keys.
You know what?
LJ, and I'm just going to steal it.
Maybe you can take the LJ home this weekend. We'll just do the old switcheroo. How's that sound?
Yeah, right.
Actually, it's kind of think of it. That's actually not a bad idea if you think about it. But no, I told him that you ran the Old Man Emu, which is apparently what he has now.
Yeah, he was making. I read your comments. It's just you've been active. I've been unpacking boxes and hanging cabinets. And yes, I run the Old Man Emu. And the research I did on OMEs was that they are. The bodies themselves, the valving and everything, whereas most shocks are good for the cheap ones, maybe 20 thou. The better ones, maybe 50 or 60 thou. Old Man Emus are designed for over 100,000. They're really supposed to be a one and done shock,
right? With
the understanding, though, that again, you rust them out, the bushings wear out, and that kind of thing. Yeah. I have probably 60,000 on my OMEs, and they are still intact. But I also don't go out and play in salted streets like we have up in the north and central states, nor do I go drive through the salt water like I watch the people at Jeep Beach. I understand that a few of those have crumbled to dust. And
parts are expensive, guys.
Yeah. So, but, and the downside is OMEs cost. Yeah. That's all there is to it. You talked about Rocksport and Bilstein 1500s. Both are good shocks.
Is it 1500 or 5100? I keep
5100s. I'm sorry, 5100s.
Just want to make sure I get that right.
Yep, and both of them are good. I've had Bilsteins, but the Bilsteins that I had were on a sports car that I owned, and had great success with the 5100s. I'm not sure how the 5100 valving will behave in a Jeep. It may be fine. I mean, that's the thing to check.
I know Brian ran them, and he seemed to enjoy them.
He enjoyed them. And so Rock Sports are a good mid-grade sock. I'm not going to tell you that they're the greatest. They tend to be somewhat stiffer valved. And depending upon your suspension, stiffer valving can be good. Understand, the valving has to match your spring rates.
Right.
The reason Old Man Emus worked really well with the metal cloaks initially, even though they were expensive, was that the metal cloak springs are relatively soft spring rate. So you need a shock that can valve to control that more softer ride. Right. It makes for a better comfort. But obviously, if you put a stiff shock on a soft spring, you're going to beat the shock to death, and your ride you're going to think your springs are too stiff. And they're not the spring's fault. Everybody, when I hear some people go, "Oh, my springs are too stiff," really? Disconnect your shock absorber and drive 50 feet and tell me if it's still too stiff. Yeah. Because most of the time, stiff suspension is a function of your shock, not your spring rate.
We also call that pulling the Animaniac. Boing, boing, boing. Sorry.
Well, yes. I didn't say to drive it anywhere. I said drive it 50 feet. Maybe over a manhole cover or a pothole to see if it's still stiff.
Again, boing, boing, boing.
But that's kind of the idea there. If you go out there and take your shock loose and do the 3 bounce test, by bouncing the corner of the vehicle up and down and then seeing how far it goes, and you can really get suspension travel just pushing up and down. It's not your springs. On the other,
No, I was saying actually with my YJ with the Adleaf kit and the Skyjacker Hydro shocks.
Yeah.
I broke my wrist practically trying to do the 3 bounce tags. It moved like a half inch and stopped.
It stopped.
And I think it was just the tire pressure is the reason why it moved.
Well, no, that's big. Yeah, because I was going to say you were using your tires as your primary shock absorber.
Man, I had the Adleaf, the Hydro shocks. I left the Panhard bar. I left all that stuff on. And the sway bar.
Yeah, I'd say that was a non-compliant suspension.
Rode like an 80s lowrider. Sorry.
But anywho, and Brandon, it's been really wild to follow your, what do you want to call it? Adventures. Yes.
Well, speaking of adventures, George, he was chasing a possible cracked flywheel.
Yep.
And he shared some really cool information on our Facebook page. So check that out because he kind of like documented all the steps he did, and it was really interesting because both him and another person that's coming up in the email soon they took the time and they followed, like Kevin talks about, like the tree of diagnosing or progress or whatever. And it turns out it was a thrust bearing that he needed or something like that on his flex plate. I think it was a thrust bearing.
No, it's a thrust bearing on his crank.
Yeah, thrust bearing on his crank. That's right. And so, good news is you didn't have a broken flywheel, flex plate. But bad news is, but I guess there's some quick fix parts you can. But I guess he has them on order with Clevite or something like that.
Yeah, and replacing the bearings and that kind of thing are. That's one of the things that can be done pretty easily. I'm trying to find the notes here. And
that's why we really appreciate your guys' feedback because, we told you.
Yeah, there it is, George's, where he talked about a worn thrust bearing will indeed allow a flex plate mounted reluctor ring to move enough to preclude putting the Jeep in reverse in an LJ. Mm-hmm. So what that is that and I'm assuming it was the crank because it looks like a crank thrust bearing to me in the picture. George, you'll let me know if it's not. But he's saying that there's enough in play. And if you've ever built engines, folks, you know that we always do crank in play. We check fore to aft, how much it'll move. Yeah. There's limits. And it's because if it moves too far backwards, it pushes your transmission shaft too far backwards, which may in fact interfere with selectors and clutch packs and things like that, causing what appears to be bad transmission, when in fact it's a sloppy engine. Yeah. It was a real problem on the VW flat fours. Because from the factory, they had a very small amount, but more than an American V8 type of in thrust. They would go clink, clink. And it was bad if there was no in play, but it was also bad if there's more than about, quote unquote, a millimeter of in play.
Yeah.
And then, but the thing is, the engine will happily run with upwards of, I don't know, a half inch of ka-dunk, 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 and it might miss a beat occasionally, but it'd run. The problem is you couldn't keep the transmission in gear because the engine kept punching the input shaft of the transmission, shifting your gears for you.
So, as you're describing this from friends of mine who do firearms, it's kind of like, the Volkswagen Flat 4, the AK-47 of vehicle motors.
That's right.
You can pour sand in it, tolerances, what are those? But it will not let you down until it does, and then it really does.
Yes. Well, I've actually seen them running on 3 cylinders quite happily.
Yeah.
So.
Well, hey, speaking of running on 3 cylinders, you want to go tip tire into the garage here for a little bit?
Yeah, let's go on over there and
this
discuss
one's going to be a deep dive. We'll be right back after me reading this message. Hey, Jeepers, it's Scott here. Just want to take a few moments to say make sure you check out the On the Trail Podcast .com website page. We also have the Facebook page, the video page, and our Patreon page. Also, we are a proud member of the 4x4 Radio Network. And with that, we're going to say hi to Kevin while we both sit out there in 7 million degree heat inside that garage. Take it away, Mr. Kevin.
Excuse me.
I've halfway gone through this tea already.
Yeah, and I just started on another one. Anyway, where we are going with this is thanks to another listener. Clayton, just want to give you a big shout out. Thanks for sending us a message and telling us, about the stuff that you're working on. Now, one of the things he brought up was, first off, he was asking about winches and bumpers, and we shared some information on him and different options. But then he's working on his TJ, and he has the classic TJ issue that the fan blower controller is slowly melting away like a candle in a Florida summer.
Well, I know he didn't. His motor wasn't working. I just kind of went down that rabbit hole to see because when he mentioned
his
relay,
TJ AC blower motor selector is melting, and
gotcha.
he was talking about the cost of it, and he looked into a video that talks about changing and adding a relay in between the fan controller and the fan as a way to provide a higher current switch than the factory puts in the dash. Mm-hmm. Scott's like, yeah, look at him, and I said, well, I'll take a look. And it was one of those that I started going, yeah, that would be pretty good idea. We'll see what we can do there. And the more I dug into it, the deeper I went, the more I'm going, not sure. Okay. First off, Clayton, let me tell you one thing. It's not bad. Please don't take anything to do with bad here. But I started digging in and started looking at, all right, what was the problem and what's the solution? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, in fact, I too have actually dealt with a melting dash switch.
Even to me a little bit.
Scott has had a little bit of an issue with it. And I've helped, I couldn't tell you how many people with that very problem. And yes, you're absolutely right. The dash switch assembly for a TJ is expensive. Mm-hmm. And it's getting more expensive every single day.
Yes.
But why is it melting? Did Chrysler really build that bad of a switch assembly? No. Or is there something else? And this led to a little bit of a fun session this afternoon, getting ready for the show, is that we realized, wait a minute, Scott, your LJ was just starting to cause discoloration to the switch, okay? But it hadn't actually failed yet.
Right.
But I had, in the last year, replaced my fan blower motor with a new one. So I have a working unit. To the garage. And off we ran to the garage and set up a little test bench just to see what's going on. Because the question is, when you look at the wiring diagram, it turns out that, yes, the controls on your dashboard are all what are called switched grounds. You are controlling the ground of the various speed circuits and the motor. There is a big fuse feeding power directly to the motor. It's a 40 amp fuse. Like, yeesh. That's a lot of fuse. And I'm very much in the kind of like, to me, that seems a little overkill. But you come out of the power distribution center on a basic TJ with a 40 amp fuse number 1, in fact, to the blower motor relay that is simply a power switch on and off from your blower motor control system. And from that, it goes straight into your blower motor. Okay, so there's one relay between a 40 amp fuse, and then it comes out of the blower motor, and the wire comes out via the black and tan. For those that are following this, it goes in on a dark green lead, and then from there, it does an interesting little twist. It tees off, and one leg goes up to the blower motor resistor block, and the other one drops down to connector C1 on the heater control panel.
Right.
And Clayton, as you noted, that lead for the high-speed fan is the one that tends to melt, or the primary one coming back out, which is pin 5. All right, and that's the dark green wire. That's the one that melts for most people because that's the common out. But if you look at a wiring diagram, you'll find out that when you're in high speed, that's just a connection between pin 1 and pin 5. It just jumpers straight across those two.
Right.
So that's where a lot of the heat's being done on high. But the other ones, that T where the black and tan actually then goes to the resistor pack, all there are 3 resistors in that board, and they add together. So black and tan, the motor would go up through a resistor and come out on pin 3 if your switch was set to high. I mean, not high, medium high, they call it.
Right.
It would go through 2 resistors and come out on the light green wire if your switch was set to medium low. And if you're set on low, it goes through all 3 resistors, and you're controlling the ground through that. Okay. You're selecting which line you're grounding, and that's what gives you your blower motor control. So what's the meltdown from? Well, it's the amperage draw.
Right.
And the amperage draw, there's only one source of amperage draw, and that's the motor.
Correct.
When the motors start, the motor's bearings, sorry, I got that backwards, start to go out, they increase the drag. And I'm not going to go into the deep dive into the electrical motor world, but an electric motor wants to spin at the rated speed that it's designed for, period.
Right.
It's an electromechanical process, and it'll just keep drawing more current and more current and more current. So oddly enough, there is no current limiter other than a 40 amp fuse between the battery and that blower motor.
Right.
So needless to say, those little contacts in the heater control die. Now, it gets the worst that you have as far as current. A resistor cuts current flow. That's why it's called a resistor.
Right.
So anything other than high blower, your blower motor resistor block, even if the motor's pulling more current, it's stepping it down. So while I'm not saying it won't melt in medium, high, medium, or low, your motor would probably have to be frozen to get enough current flow to the actual grounding switch, which is your little selector for speeds,
Right.
To melt the thing. So that's why it only melts in the higher position. And the highest position doesn't go through the resistor block at all. It just goes straight to the switch, which goes to ground. Technically, there's one break in there, and that's in your heater control off switch. If you turn it on, every single position, 1, 2, 3, 4, which is off, vent, heat, and mix, and defrost, all have a stripe that takes that green wire to ground. So putting a relay in to ground out the black and tan, okay, which is that blower motor to ground, will definitely take care of that because you are talking about putting a 40 amp relay in. So you're matching your relay to the fuse coming into that motor. The downside is you pull 40 amps through that motor, you're going to have a smoke ball coming out of your dash.
We released the magic blue smoke, and that won't work anymore.
Be very careful with that, okay, because I don't necessarily agree. I'm like everybody else. I don't like the fact that they use the heater control panel as your safety. So what's the rabbit hole? We said, well, what are we talking about amperage-wise? What are we actually drawing through a 40 amp fuse? You know, did they miss a protective level? And I think the answer came out pretty clear, didn't it, Scott?
Yes, it did.
They kind of blew it. We had Scott's old blower motor from the LJ in the whole heater dash up here.
Well, what I did is when we bench built the evaporator and heater core and all that a couple years back, I went ahead and went to a salvage yard and I bought a whole heater box assembly.
Yeah, and it was easier because we could pre-build essentially a fully refurbished heater box so that we were able to pull his box and put a whole new one in one go.
Yes.
So as soon as the old one cleared the firewall, hand me the new one, we shoved it in. I know exactly where we left the bolts and screws, how bad I chewed up my hand trying to get the one behind the cylinder head.
Yes.
But the thing was, we were able to do a whole heater core, air conditioner core, blower motor swap in about 5 hours.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is, for a TJ, if you've ever done one, that's a pretty pit stop level
surgery. You're pulling the whole dash out, literally.
Yeah. So anyhow, so we had that one. And when we were taking his old one apart, we realized that the blower switch was pretty discolored.
Yeah.
It hadn't failed, but it was definitely suffering from heat.
It got a little melty.
So I'm sitting there going, this is a great opportunity to look at this issue down at the root cause. Go ahead. You wanted to chime in?
Well, I did want to chime in because even though though that switch was melty, and eventually I lost, it was very sporadic. I'd have no speed or nothing. It was probably done because of all that years of being drawn, because it was a factory blower motor that was in there.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. And so what did we do? Well, I went ahead and pulled the blower motor out of my TJ, the running one, set it on the table, had a little folding table, got out my power probe, hooked it up to the TJ as a source.
Yep.
Got the old one out of his that was known to be causing overheating in the switch. Okay, so we know that, even though it's been in the barn for a while. And then we hooked it up through my multi-tester to an amp probe.
Right.
And we measured what was a good but used blower motor out of mine. It's got at least a year, maybe 2 of running time, but it's not causing any problems or switch issues. And we have one that we knew was causing some difficulties.
Right.
And I wanted to see, just so that you know, and this was an interesting result. The good but used one was pulling a maximum, and this is a direct draw, where it had unlimited ability to pull as much current as it want. No blower resistor. Basically the same as when you set your switch on high blower. And the good one was pulling 4.5 amps. So that's not a bad number. Okay.
On high, 4.5 amps.
And boy, it was cooking.
It raced off the table at one point.
Yes, it did. And it's now short one blade. But it still works and is not out of balance. So, but Scott's, which is running, was working, but was causing the switch to begin to discolor and get a little plastic and soft.
And even spinning it by hand, it only did like one rotation and stopped.
Which is the common failure of those things. And it was pulling 6.8 amps. And we did this test about 3 times just to make sure the numbers. So at 6.8 amps, you're overloading that rotary switch. All right. But at 4.5, you're not. I would hesitate. I would not hesitate. I would suggest, and I may try this. In fact, I think I will on the TJ. Because one of the things about relaying out through the black and tan to ground is good. But again, you've got no protection, nothing between you and fried motor, Crispies coming up through your vents.
Right.
Is to take that and just put a fuse to the blower motor. Okay. And it looks like a 5 amp fuse just happens to fall in that neutral zone between the two.
Right.
And you can put it in the black and tan, which is the wire between the blower motor and the heater control block, or you could put it in the dark green wire leading to it and just protect it on the front end, which is usually what's recommended.
Right.
And see, and I may just do that, folks, for you guys. Or if somebody else wants to try it, I'm just going to get an inline fuse holder, cut that line, splice it in properly, and put a 5 amp fuse in there, and then see if it runs fine. And if it runs fine and all my controls work, I now have a safety that before the motor starts pulling enough amperage to damage the heater controls, I should pop the fuse.
Right.
Because 5 is less than 6.8. And believe me, if you take a 5 amp fuse and pump 6 amps through it, it'll pop.
Yeah.
It'll pop. And if you keep popping blower motor fuses at, a couple of cents a piece, it's time to put a new blower motor in, which is what really the answer is to replace the high current draw.
Right.
Now, the relay, again, not against it. It is a suitable answer. And so that's kind of what I'm looking at here was that, Clayton, this was awesome that you shared this with us, because initially I was like, oh, that's a neat idea. Let me take a look at it. But I'm trying to figure out how the multiple speeds work. And I got the idea that, one relay per speed does get the heater control completely out of the circuit. And yes, they are very expensive, folks. They're probably, about $160 to $180 a piece now.
Yeah, I think the cheapest one I found on Amazon was like $132, but this was a few months ago.
Yeah.
And that was the one that was the cheapest, but would take 7 months to get
here. Yeah. So, having the relays in on the ground, because that's all that is happening here, is that your heater control switch fan speeds is just selecting between no resistor, 1 resistor, 2, 3 resistors, and ground. Okay. Right. It's the earth or ground side of the circuit. So, it's putting a bank of relays in with 4 relays for high going straight to ground, medium high going to pin 3 on the resistor block, yada, 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 or 4, 3, 2, 1, whatever, to get it hooked up. All of that would work, and you could build it almost completely isolated heater control, which has merit too. But then you could also still put the fuse in. And it's going to be interesting, because that's really the key here is how do you protect the blower motor? I find it, Princess Bride, inconceivable that nice. They would not put a rated fuse on the blower motor circuit. But I'm sitting here with the diagram wide open, and I'm going, okay, start from battery, A1, into the PDA, 40 amp fuse, following it down, hit the pin 4 on the blower motor relay common, switch, when you turn the AC on, it goes to 1 and goes to connector, registered B for the cross connect, and there's B, and B goes 12, C12 blower motor. Mm-hmm. I'm going, they fed the blower motor from a essentially 40 amp main. Mm-hmm. So there is no protection between other than the motor. And when you're on high amperage, on high speed, the output from the blower motor, the ground side, goes straight to that switch and straight to ground. So the only thing that controls the current draw is the motor itself. So when the motor wears and the bearing's going bad, the amperage generally increases until the switch dies. Yeah. So, there's your real problem is the blower motors. And the sad thing is, I do know for a fact, I had mine that ran. You could hook it up to a power probe and run it fine, but it was pulling like 15 amps. But 15 amps on a 40 amp circuit ain't anything, is it? Yeah. So it's an interesting thing that your questions and comments kind of led to, Clayton, is the fact that after doing a little bit of case studying, I can see where I think Chrysler may have kind of oopsied there.
Well, if you look at a TJ fuse panel, I mean, it's 7 fuses and a 8-track. I mean, it's very archaic.
It is.
But I'm sorry, it's more than that. It's like 9
I know,
fuses. But it's just fun to watch, because what is that Clayton's question led us down a rabbit hole in a possible solution that is maybe better, maybe just the same, but less evasive, because I know the space behind that dash is not a lot. If you want to add 3 relays to do that bypassing and do that, that
still wouldn't change the fact that while it wouldn't melt the heater control, you're still not protecting the blower motor. And that's what got to me, was the shock when I was looking at this, Clayton, and saw the blower motor and was tracing the circuit back. And my God, it's coming from the 40 amp fuse 1. Yeah. That's the major power feed. Mm-hmm. There's really no.
Yeah, no,
that's higher amperage draw than your household breakers.
Well, that aside, but I mean, how many times we talk about Jeeps catching fire? Mm-hmm. I mean, anytime we can take a chance to make things a little safer, it's not a bad idea. It's really not.
It's not, and it's something you can check. If your air conditioner doesn't work and you go in there and you're like, oh, look, this fuse is blown. It's funny. There's tons of other fuses in the HVAC control system, but not on the blower motor. So it just seems to me that I really don't know what went on there, but it's just unusual that there's only a 40 amp. 40 amp would only really protect you against a dead short.
Yeah.
If the motor starts overheating, and obviously it can make the switches overheat, but if the motor started stalling out and overheating, you picked up too many leaves on the intake. And by the way, that can be, it's not just bearings. I mean, believe me, I took mine out and was pouring leaves out of the squirrel cage fan, you know, because it sits in a TJ facing up. The cup faces up and the blades face sideways.
Yeah.
And, it was carrying a fair amount of load there. And guess what? It takes more amperage to move junk than it does air. So, anyhow, I'm going to look at, just from my point of view, next time I have some time, and actually I have the power hooked up to the tools, I think the 12 gauge dark green feed line between the blower motor relay on the HVAC panel to the blower motor itself is going to get a fuse in it.
I think that's a kind of a good idea.
And we're going to test it out and see if I pop it just running it, or if it runs fine until it pops, and then I go check the amperage on the motor and find out that it's up in the, I don't know, above 5, obviously, because we know that 6.8 is not melt your dash, but it's right at the ragged edge.
Mm-hmm. It's like the backside of the black section was all wavy, and it was not good.
It was not good. So, and once again, folks, this is just based on one test with 2 blower motors. Your results may vary. Take it with a grain of salt. I have no idea. 5 amps may be popping immediately. It may not. Both of them, when you first turn on the blower motor, surge pretty hard. So
the bad one surged to 8. Yeah.
Actually, the bad one went up to 9 the first time I started it, but that was after we pulled it out of a dusty barn.
Yeah.
So, but I just, it's a perfect way to test, is I can put a 5 in there and see if it pops. And usually you can get the whole thing about the cartridge fuses, the ATs and those kinds, is that they can take a starting current. You know, and the starting current was not massive. I do know that starting current on my multimeter, I'm maxed at overloaded at 10 amps. And every time I started the old motor that was running at 6.8, it flashed overload till the motor came up to speed, which tells me that it's above 10 amps of a startup draw and running at 6 amps. Whereas it did not, it only blinked very lightly, I guess, right when you turned it on for the known good motor.
Well, the interesting thing, too, is you said when you're holding it, it actually, you can feel it trying to twist out of your hand.
Yeah, the reaction force of the blower was actually noticeable, which means there's a lot of drag on the bearings, which is the classic failure for these squirrel cage fans, is they just, the butt bearing at the back goes out because the weight of the fan is sitting on it. The top bearing is just acting as a stabilizer, but the actual support is out of that back end one at the butt end of the fan.
So in a way, the squirrel cage also needs a thrust bearing.
Well, that's what it is.
I'm
is a thrust bearing.
I wasn't trying to make a joke. It's actually being kind of serious.
Right.
And that's the really cool things about all of the emails that we had was everyone, like I said, taking that time. And they all said the same thing. It's like, your guys' contributions with these shows help them solve their problems. And this is why we really care about when you guys give us feedback and talk and give us show ideas, because these are real world problems. Mm-hmm. If you have a JL or a JK, share those too.
Yes, please.
Because we tend to be TJ heavy, trying to get some more Gladiator stuff in here.
Well, the Gladiator hasn't broken down enough to be warranted that much service yet. And the TJs, it's like I just got back from a call that it didn't happen, but it got me started on a 06 TJ's turn signals weren't working.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the circuit diagrams and went up and talked to the shop owner, and I said, there's not much to go wrong here.
Yeah.
But here's where you check this for power, here for power, here for power, here for ground, here for ground, here for ground. If any one of those are missing, guess what? They ain't gonna work. So he's like, oh, well, that's not so bad. I said, yep.
Yeah. And I hear you say all the time is majority of the electrical problems are grounds, correct?
Correct. Most people ignore grounds, and that's the problem. And here's the other thing about grounds is that when you unplug and replug, which will fix a possible dirty power connector, how many people actually remove a device physically and then put it back in?
To me, a lot.
Yeah, but that's what I'm talking about, is where the grounds, a lot of times the ground connection is the case. Okay. And therefore, if it's not removed, you don't clean the grounds. It's not easy.
I see what you're saying.
Grounds are a problem, folks, and I know I harp on it, but it's because every time I get called out no, that's not a fair statement, Kevin. It's not every time, but the majority of the time I'm called out for a mystery electrical, it tends to be a ground issue. Occasionally it's a power issue, and even far less, almost infinitesimally, is there an actual wire problem in what's called the control circuitry. Powers are pretty obvious when you're working them.
Yeah.
And you can take a power probe and you can go, okay, do I have power here? Do I have, power here? Do I have power there? You get to the device. Do I have power into the connector? Yes. Okay, you've checked the power. All right. On the other hand, grounds are a little more elusive. If you have ground wires, yes, you can go between, and a mistake a lot of people do is they check ground against the piece of metal they're closest to. Well, no. Grounds are checked by going back to the battery. You have to have a black line that goes all the way back to your battery, and then you can take and test continuity between the negative terminal on the battery and whatever you think is grounded.
Right.
And when you do that, and it's a case ground, how many times have you seen me touching the case of something and stabbing the heck out of it and no beep? Okay?
Yeah.
And it's not grounded anymore. Okay? And then if you hold the test against that with no beep, but plug it back in and turn it on, suddenly it starts working.
Mm-hmm.
The ground side is not inherently a problem child. It's just an unseen child. It's that quiet one that hangs behind the door when company comes, not the loudmouth kid who's out front of everybody saying, you bring me something. That's the power side. You bump the power side, it goes bazap. If you strip a wire on the ground and touch it with something, nothing happens. And you get a busted insulation and water gets in there, and you get, shout out to Eric O at what's his YouTube video? Eric, I'm sorry.
Is it the judo chop guy?
Yeah. But anyway, he's the one who started calling it the pus,
while you look
green
at that,
pus. Yeah.
While you look that up real quickly, I just wanted to jump
South
in.
Main Auto.
South Main Auto. Okay. I just wanted to jump in there for a second, because when we talk about how elusive like grounds and everything can be, again, it boils down to the electrical pathways.
Yep.
The garbage in, garbage out, especially on DC electrical.
Yeah.
That was one of the things I was thinking about, because I understand DC. I still don't understand house wiring. Kevin has tried to show me about amplitudes and longitudes or whatever they are, attitudes. I don't get it. You might as well be speaking Klingon to me. But I understand the DC current. You got to have a solid of both to understand the basic.
It's a full circuit from the one terminal of battery to the other.
Yeah.
And the ground is just forgotten most of the time. People don't think of the ground because you don't see the ground, because we chose, and rightfully so, economically, to use the automobile's body and chassis themselves as the ground path.
Yeah.
The other reason it tends to come up is wires are typically copper. That's typically power. Okay. And while copper does corrode, it will operate corroded. All right. On the other hand, the chassis of a car does one noticeable thing that copper wires don't.
Okay.
It rusts.
Yes.
Okay. And guess what? Rust doesn't conduct.
No.
All right. And so your connector, your ground screw at your firewall that has your headlights and turn signals grounded, if that looks like sin and crud and rust, a ball of rust, you probably don't have a good ground.
No.
And so there's the limit. That's one of the reasons I preach: clean the metal, clean the screw, clean the tab, and then use an internally toothed star washer, not an externally toothed star washer. Mm-hmm. Because then when you tighten it down flat, the teeth dig into the metal in both of them, but one of them, the teeth is inside a protected circle, and the other one, it's outside where the elements can chew on it. So that's why the inside toothed washers are better for putting ground screws into frames. I also don't like self-piercing bolts. All right, because you can't really tighten them tight enough without them stripping out the sheet metal. Put a nut and a bolt on it, or if it's got a block. If you look at most of the factory grounds, they're in those little welded nuts that are welded to the sheet metal, and
they're coated with epoxy
and close them. The new ones are.
Yeah,
but clean up the surface good, and then cinch it down tight, and then cover it with grease, Vaseline. What is the sheep stuff?
On that note,
lanolin materials,
or liquid electrical tape, which I do want to take a quick little bind because, again, while we were called out, or Kevin was called out to go help out somebody, a electrical problem came in on a JK, and it's very interesting because when I saw the electrical hardware that was offered with this kit, it was ghastly. I mean, not unsoldered connectors, uninsulated connectors. I looked at this and the very chintzy hardware and everything else, and I'm going, okay, they had problems with the installation, but you got to think about things like pinch points. You got to think about, abrasives you just mentioned. You got to think about that. Like, okay, it might work for today, but what about a year from now when it's in the elements all this time?
Yeah, and vibration, and I don't know about any of you guys, but somebody find me a Jeep that's as smooth as my wife's Mercedes. Okay, and I'm not being mean, but even the Mercedes has a vibration. They just isolate it well. But in my Jeep, everything buzzes, shakes, moves, rattles,
Even in the Gladiator at 70-ish miles an hour, I got a little wiggle in the hips.
Yeah, but if you take a look at things where wires are put into pinch points, they're going to rub through eventually. I got news for you. Sheet metal is a whole lot tougher than the soy-based insulation material.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, by the way, I saw something, the coolest thing.
What's that?
And Honda came out with it.
What's that?
Well, you know that we're all dealing with rodentia snacking on wires, okay? Because the insulation, folks, if you haven't figured it out since about, 16, I think? Somewhere in the 16 to 18 range, they came out with eco-friendly soy-based plastic insulation for wires. And a lot of manufacturers went that way. Toyota, Honda, a lot of them went first. But it's also in the Jeeps. And apparently it tastes good. It's not really good for them, but we don't care about the rodents, particularly if you're up in the north and you barn keep your vehicle over the winter and they make nests and they nibble and yada, yada, yada. Well, Honda came out with a rodent-resistant electrical tape.
Nice.
It's very expensive, but that is in their service bulletin for if you have a rodent-nibbled area and after you've done the proper repairs to the wires, you can wrap the finished area with this tape. And across the back of the black tape, it's got little cats printed on the top of the tape. So you know that it's rodent-resistant tape. I was like, oh, my God. Of course, Susan's like, ooh, I want some. I was like, for what? But, so we're going to protect the soy-based eco-friendly wire with some toxic or actually it's not toxic. What is it? It's capsaicin laced.
Yeah.
Crap. Scott's already, I'll chew on something.
No, what's funny is that I'm sitting here shaking my head and Kevin was probably wondering what I was getting ready to say. And the funniest thing that he doesn't realize, now I know I'm in rural America because behind him, his window's open and I'm staring at the cows in the field that aren't there right now. But the funniest thing he says, something new from Honda, as a Honda clubman went down his street with hay bales in the back of it.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
As he's saying that, and I just sat here and just tried not to laugh to interrupt his train of thought. So it's funny. It was a Honda Clubman or whatever it was. It was Honda on the side,
yes.
And it was a little UTV dump truck with hay,
a little quad,
and he drove down the road as he said that, and I just started trying not to laugh, going, "Yep, I'm out in the sticks."
You are.
When I leave here, I turn on the daily farm report, to find out if there's a dead cow on Route 2 and blocking traffic. But so that's why I kind of got quiet there for a moment there, fellas.
So anyway, again, guys, I've probably gone way too deep down the rat hole on this.
This is what they wanted.
Well, that's what you said, but okay.
Yeah, no, the emails are there, buddy. You can read them, and it's really cool. And again, I think it's time we should start wrapping this up.
I agree.
Kevin and I really appreciate the feedback.
We do. I just got to honestly tell you that, Brandon, Clayton, Jeff, Bob, Ed, Brent, George, my goodness, George.
Yeah.
all of you guys, all your time you're spending writing us emails, we love it.
Yeah.
Thank you so very, very much. And you can put ideas in the head and ask questions that get me going. And it's fun. It really is. And Scott's looking at me and I go, I just need to test this. He goes, well, we have the blower motor out in your barn. Oh, crap.
We can do it right now.
And so we did it right. Yeah. And then he's going, oh, crap. I just sent him back out in 120 degree heat.
That's okay. We got to get your smusher off the back of the thing for hopefully Saturday. But the really cool thing is that
compactor, but okay.
Yeah, that too. But the really cool thing is that that too, because I'm seeking assistance with my all my grief lately. My counselor said something that I'm going to share with you guys.
Oh.
And she says, don't worry, Scott, you're going to get tired of me before I get tired of you. Let me tell you something, listeners. You're going to get tired of us before we get tired of hearing your emails.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Hearing
because
our emails.
Yeah. And even
that's an oxymoron.
That too. But the important part though is that, and again, I also want to say thank you because our downloads are up. We gained 60 more points in the rankings.
Oh.
And that's you guys. That's you guys making this show a success.
So thank you.
So every time you guys and gals share a show and talk to your friends and say, "Look, it's a great cure for insomnia." Great, thank you. I know for a fact we have non-Jeep people listening because the fact they are learning something.
And by the way, I do have to give a special shout out back to Clayton. Clayton, I hope things are going well in Beckley. It's been years, but I used to be in Beckley quite a bit in the past when I was younger. So you take good care of the folks out there, okay?
Mm-hmm. Well, and important also too, they're an over the road trucker.
Yeah, okay.
Which is kind of nice, and I'm sure we're popular with the over the road truckers. I think we have a couple of listeners of that. So again, guys, stay safe and keep the rubber side down and the shiny side up, please.
Boy, how Smokey and the Bandit reference can you get there?
I'm on a Smokey. Dude, you talking to a guy out there right now with a black Gladiator and bronze wheels.
Oh, that's true.
All that's missing is a fire chicken on the hood. But the funniest thing was I was out seeing Alex over at the dealership. He goes, "Hey, can you pull up the black Jeep with gold wheels?" And I yell, "Bronze! Excuse me, sorry, bronze wheels." I can't help but cry.
Hey, you wanted to remind folks that coming up is the thing on your shirt.
On my shirt. Yeah, the Florida Team Challenge. That's coming up here. Registration opens in August. Yes, and on that note, Kevin and I are also going to be at the Jasper or Pickens County Jeep Fest in Jasper.
Pickens County Sheriff's
Jeep Fest. I will promise I will make that mistake 17 more times.
All right.
And also Crawling for the Fallen. They have had, this is the year if you want to reach out and help. Unfortunately,
they need it. It has been a very difficult year for the law enforcement.
3 times more names than last year.
Yeah. A 3-fold increase.
Yes. And so please, take a moment, even anything you can to help out that event. It's Off-Road United. And I'm trying to think of anything else we have for announcements besides the fact that today will be tater tots and pizza.
I don't know. I had the meatloaf.
Yeah, that was actually good. And I got half my cube in your fridge, too. I got to remember that. Sorry. Welcome to Foodcast with Kevin and Scott. But I'm trying to think, is there anything else we need to do besides,
sign off?
Oh, yeah, sign off. Yeah.
And
Look at me. I'm thinking. I had to do it one more time, folks.
Okay.
It's compulsory. So with that, I think it's time we lock hubs, put the Jeep in 4-low, and hit the trail.
Yep. And remember, please take nothing but memories, pictures, and your trash when you leave the trail. Because we really want to keep it open for our kids and our kids' kids and our kids' kids' kids, It's kind of sad when they get closed because some idiot left their McDonald's. Sorry, I shouldn't pick on their fast food restaurant.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Munchies.
Cease and desist from the clown.
And it's not the part of it's not their fault that the trash is left. They have it printed all over it to properly dispose of in their trash. So anyhow, y'all take care. And we will see you in another 2 weeks.
Sounds like a plan. Bye.
Bye now.
Proceeding has been provided for entertainment only. Proper service and repair procedures are vital to the safe, reliable operation of all motor vehicles, as well as personal safety of those performing those repairs. Standard safety procedures and precaution, including the use of safety goggles and proper tools and equipment, should be followed at all times to eliminate the possibility of personal injury or improper service which could damage the vehicle or compromise its safety.
What he said. Thanks a lot for listening, guys. You guys have a great day.
Bye.
This has been a Bent Axle Media production.